Catherine's hard work was finally starting to pay off. One morning, as she was serving coffee at the cafe, she received a phone call from a local company she had applied to for an internship. "Catherine, we'd like to invite you for an interview," the voice on the other end said. Catherine's heart leaped with joy. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. She thanked them and quickly jotted down the details. That night, she stayed up late preparing for the interview, making sure she was ready to impress. On the day of the interview, Catherine dressed in her best clothes and walked into the office with her head held high. Despite her nerves, she remained confident, answering each question with poise. At the end of the meeting, the hiring manager smiled. "You've got the job," he said, extending his hand. Catherine could hardly believe it. After all her struggles, she had finally secured a position. It wasn't a high-paying job, but it was a start. She would be assisting with office work, making copies, running errands, but to Catherine, it was everything. This was the beginning of her new life. Kelvin's gambling habit had grown out of control. He was constantly in debt, borrowing money from anyone who would lend it to him. His friends, once eager to spend time with him, were now growing tired of his reckless behavior. He was no longer the fun, carefree guy they had once known. Instead, he was desperate, always looking for a way to make a quick buck. But no matter how much he won, it was never enough. The more he gambled, the more he lost, and the deeper into debt he fell. One night, after losing a particularly large sum of money, Kelvin returned home to find his father waiting for him again. "Kelvin, this has to stop," his father said, his voice filled with anger and disappointment. "You're ruining this family." Kelvin, too ashamed to look him in the eye, muttered a half-hearted apology and stumbled up to his room. But as he lay in bed, the reality of his situation began to sink in. He was running out of time, and if he didn't turn his life around soon, there would be no coming back. As the months passed, Catherine continued to excel at her job. Her work ethic and determination didn't go unnoticed, and soon she was given more responsibilities. She went from fetching coffee and making copies to assisting with projects and presentations. Her supervisors were impressed with her ability to learn quickly and handle pressure. Catherine, for the first time in her life, felt like she was finally being recognized for her talents. It wasn't long before she was promoted to a more significant role in the company, handling more important tasks. With each promotion, Catherine grew more confident. She was no longer the girl who sought approval from her father or anyone else. She had carved out a place for herself in the world, and she was proud of it. Her co-workers admired her, and her bosses respected her. Catherine had proven to herself, and to everyone else, that she was capable of achieving great things. But even as she celebrated her success, she couldn't help but wonder about her family. What had become of her father and Kelvin? She hadn't spoken to them in years, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As Catherine and their father worked to piece together a plan, Kelvin had fallen further into trouble. Despite Catherine's attempts to help him, he had continued to gamble and drink, ignoring the warnings from his father. He wasn't ready to change, and his desperation was growing. One night, Kelvin found himself in a seedy bar, surrounded by shady characters. He had run out of options and was willing to do anything to get money. It was here that he made the worst decision of his life. In his drunken state, Kelvin called his father, begging for money once again. When his father refused, telling him that Catherine had come back to help, Kelvin was consumed with jealousy. He felt as though Catherine had always been the favored one now, successful, respected, and loved. Fueled by anger and alcohol, Kelvin made a dangerous choice. He decided to take matters into his own hands and concocted a plan to get money, no matter the cost. Kelvin's plan was reckless. He convinced himself that the only way to get what he wanted was to manipulate Catherine and their father. He knew his father was weak and that Catherine would do anything to protect their family. So, he decided to fake an emergency. Kelvin contacted his father late one night, pretending to be in danger. "I need help," he whispered into the phone, his voice shaky. "They're coming for me, Dad. I'm in deep trouble, and I need Catherine to send me money fast." His father, panicked and worried, called Catherine immediately, relaying Kelvin's frantic message. Catherine was in the middle of an important meeting when she received the call, but the urgency in her father's voice made her drop everything. "I'll take care of it," she assured. She had been down this road with Kelvin before, and she knew his tricks, but this time felt different. It felt more dangerous, and Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that her brother had crossed a line he couldn't come back from. Following Kelvin's instructions, Catherine drove to a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of town, her heart racing. The place was dark, eerie, and completely silent. When she arrived, she found her father tied up in a chair, bruised and looking terrified. Her worst fears had come true. Kelvin had kidnapped their father in a desperate attempt to extort money from her. Catherine's blood boiled with anger and disbelief. She had given Kelvin so many chances, and this was how he repaid her. Kelvin emerged from the shadows, a twisted smirk on his face. "You didn't think I'd let you walk away so easily, did you, Catherine?" he sneered. "You owe me. This family owes me. I was supposed to be the one who made it, not you." Catherine's heart broke as she looked at her brother. The once bright boy she had grown up with was now unrecognizable, consumed by greed and anger. "Let him go, Kelvin," she demanded, her voice trembling. "This isn't the way." But Kelvin wasn't listening. He was too far gone, blinded by his desire for money and revenge. Catherine knew she had to act fast. Kelvin was growing more unhinged by the second, and their father was in danger. "Kelvin, listen to me," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "We're family. This isn't you. You don't have to go down this path." For a moment, Kelvin hesitated. He looked at his sister, and Catherine could see the flicker of the brother she once knew. But the anger quickly returned, and he shook his head. "It's too late for that, Catherine," he said, his voice cold. "I need the money now." Catherine, sensing that reasoning with him wouldn't work, discreetly texted her friend, a police officer, sharing her location. She needed to buy time until help arrived. "I'll give you the money, Kelvin," she lied, pulling out her phone as if to transfer the funds. "But let Dad go first." Kelvin eyed her suspiciously but didn't make a move. The tension in the air was palpable, and Catherine could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She needed to stall him just a little longer. Just as Kelvin was about to demand proof of the money transfer, the sound of police sirens echoed in the distance. Kelvin's eyes widened in panic, and he grabbed their father by the collar. "What did you do?" he shouted, his voice frantic. "You called the cops." Catherine stood her ground, trying to remain calm. "Let him go, Kelvin." "It's over," she said firmly. But Kelvin wasn't ready to give up. Desperate and cornered, he began threatening to harm their father if the police came any closer. The police cars screeched to a halt outside the warehouse, and officers surrounded the building. Catherine's friend, Officer James, stepped forward with his hands raised, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Kelvin, you don't want to do this," he said calmly. "It's not too late to walk away." Kelvin's grip on their father tightened, and for a moment it seemed like he might lash out. But as the officers slowly approached, he began to realize that there was no way out. Defeated, Kelvin finally let go of their father and sank to the ground, his head in his hands. With Kelvin in police custody, Catherine rushed to her father's side. He was shaken, but unharmed. As the officers escorted Kelvin away, Catherine couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness. This wasn't how things were supposed to end. Kelvin had been given every opportunity, and yet here he was, being taken away in handcuffs. It was a harsh reminder of how far he had fallen. As she watched him disappear into the police car, Catherine's heart ached for the brother she had lost. Back at home, Catherine and her father sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. The house was still, the weight of the day's events hanging heavily in the air. After a long pause, their father spoke. "I'm sorry, Catherine," he said quietly, his voice filled with remorse. "I failed you. I failed both of you." Catherine looked at him, her own emotions swirling inside her. She had waited years to hear those words, but now that they were finally spoken, they didn't bring her the closure she had expected. "It's not too late to make things right, Dad," she said softly, reaching for his hand.